First and foremost, I'd say that books are fun entertainment, and I think that's an important thing to remember. Even when we're dealing with some issues that are quite serious and sustainable development goals, which my books inadvertently touch on, are certainly serious issues. I can't imagine anything more serious. But first and foremost, both as a child and now, books for me are fun. Art is fun and literature is fun. And I think that kind of entertainment value is the perfect gateway to deeper thinking about subjects. So some of these issues, for instance, can be quite overwhelming. If we think about poverty or climate change or inequality or even economic development, they can be a little abstract and hard to grasp. Also for children, these subjects can be, as much for adults, kind of boring. Our attention as human animals is naturally drawn to narratives involving characters and emotions. And I think at the heart of all SDGs, there is a deep emotional value. That is, we're motivated to kind of a higher consciousness about problems in society by an emotional reaction to feelings of injustice, feelings that something is wrong, that something needs to be improved, that there is some kind of higher consciousness that we need to access as people, and that we will otherwise struggle if we don't access this. And I guess it's quite a big subject to discuss. I actually was only very vaguely aware of SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. I actually had to look up the acronym before giving this interview, but I realised that a lot of these principles that are spelt out by the United Nations and other organisations are actually quite innate in us. They're sort of much like human rights. We kind of know them before we know them. They're deep in our hearts and minds, and we see this particularly in the kind of heightened social and cultural awareness of children, particularly their sense of justice and fairness and the idea of rightness. It seems to be something that is quite universal, is shared equally amongst different cultures, and often comes out through our storytelling, strangely enough, as much as in our dreams and our other more subconscious thinking. So I kind of think that books and art and literature are a way of bringing those deeper, almost inherent emotions that we have as human beings into some kind of more conscious, rational thinking, and making that connection with problems that can otherwise be a little bit abstract and hard to conceive of. But the one thing that I can do as an artist, I realise, and I've become quite skilled at, is asking an interesting question in a strange way and in an unexpected way, and one that encourages us to think about difficult subjects in a way that's accessible and at a human scale. And I would have to say kind of funny too. So humour, I think, is quite important. And I find picture books are somewhat inherently humorous in the way that they're presented and structured. An example would be my book Cicada, which is about an insect that works in an office, and it's a very dehumanizing place. And I think this is I realise a problem that I must have been thinking about subconsciously in creating that book, and that is the dehumanizing nature of work in at many levels of society, both very poor societies and even in wealthy industrialized societies, how the way positive human emotion, inspiration and hope can be crushed by the sort of corporate structures and strange soulless environments that we set up for ourselves in the pursuit of fairly abstract ideals of profit and progress. And this is a story about an insect who is almost suffers a kind of species prejudice in the office place, but it could be read as a metaphor for any other kind of social separation, and works for 17 years without any kind of appreciation, and at the end of the story flies away to a forest. And it's actually a very strange story. I'm still, after completing it, pondering what it might mean, but it's one that is so simple and strange that adults and children are able to relate to it alike, and that's quite interesting to me, the way in which different readers from different backgrounds, from different cultures, and by that I mean both different nationalities and different ages, because every age has a certain culture, different generations have different cultures. And I'm interested in those kinds of stories that can tap into the common anxieties that we all share, whether we're 5 years old, 50 years old, or 90 years old. And I think picture books are really wonderful at being able to connect us as humans and to provoke discussion. I think first and foremost that when dealing with art and literature, it's not really about a set of responsibilities. I mean, it is, but we shouldn't think about it that way. Mainly, the purpose of presenting literature, especially to children, is to get people to think for themselves using all the resources that they already have in their own minds and hearts that they might not have even known that they had. So the best stories for me are those that make me realize things that I'm thinking, or things that I know, or opinions that I have that I wasn't even aware of. And it always has to come from the reader. It doesn't come from the author, it doesn't come from the illustrator, the publisher, the librarian, or the teacher. It must come from the child, and the way that happens is by asking some really interesting questions in a surprising way. So what is the nature of work in the modern world? We ask that question using an insect. So I guess at the end of the day, what I hope for a successful book is not something I can control very much or intend to do, but it's a process by which the reader is inspired to bring certain curious feelings to events that are happening in the real world. It almost like it gives us a variety of emotional tools when we look at good picture books, or good comics or films or any other kind of storytelling. It gives us a variety of emotional tools that when we see things happening in real life, we can think about them more imaginatively. That's also important, I think, for people to have some sense of agency, independent and free thinking, especially in the face of a world which is almost drowning in misinformation, in authoritarian regimes that want to suppress or mislead, and just being able to think for oneself, to ask fairly deep questions about what's right and wrong, and to listen carefully and to have a very critical imagination, I would say. That is, to think imaginatively and to question at the same time. Are there other ways of existing? Are there other ways of being? Is the thing that I'm hearing or being told necessarily the truth? Are there other kinds of truth? And ultimately, building your own library of thoughts and ideas and feelings that will give you strength in trying to understand the world. And that has to start fairly early in life. And I think that's what all education is about, really. It's not about telling you information, it's about giving you tools for imagining possible ways of being in the world. I hope that my books do actually help in some small way. I think, everything that a picture book creator does is kind of a drop in the ocean. But, as the saying goes, the ocean is nothing if not an accumulation of drops. And I think all of us, writers, artists, educators, teachers, people working in all aspects of education, no single effort causes change, but collectively we're able to. And I'm heartened by the ways in which things have changed in the past and attitudes have changed, and even attitudes towards the problem of climate change have become more aligned with scientific reality. And there is hope. It's difficult, but there's hope, and we all have to make a contribution to that. But first and foremost, I would say that begins with being true to ourselves and our passions, and our sources of inspiration and hope. And I would like to think that children are able to find their own strengths in the things that inspire them and make them feel hopeful, whatever those skills or activities happen to be, and that those kind of sparks are the core of their talent, which leads them to things that they are passionate about, which will hopefully help the world. And it always has to begin with passion. So thanks very much for inviting me to be part of this project and to share some words along with other artists. And I wish you all the best, and here's to books and literature for young people. Thank you.